time, let us, I'll just start with a welcome session and then move on with the session. So a very good evening to all the respected members in the panel and a very warm welcome to all the participants in this webinar. I once again welcome you all on behalf of Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, University of Technology, West Bengal, India, in the third webinar of the series on application of artificial intelligence on geospatial data. For the participants who are joining us for the first time, we wish to inform you that we had organized the first webinar of this geoinformatics series on 30th May 2020, the second one on 6th June, that is last Saturday, and we had got an overwhelming response. It is really good to see the increasing interest and awareness in the geospatial AI in our community, which is indeed a new frontier of technological innovation with its applications used to solve the intriguing problems of today. So today also we have participants not only from the state of West Bengal, but also from other states of India and other countries as well. So it is a privilege for us to host this seminar, this webinar, for all our participants far and wide. Now, in the last few sessions, we had eminent researchers in the field, Professor Sucharita Gopal from Boston University, Professor Antonio Plaza from the University of Extremadura, Spain, Professor Surya Durga from IIT Mumbai, and Professor Jun Li from Sun Yat-sen University, China. We heard them speaking about spatializing the incidence and mortality of coronavirus using artificial intelligence and big data geoinformatics. We also heard speakers speak on the recent advances on spectral unmixing of remotely sensed hyperspectral data. The experts also spoke about the applications of AI in extreme event detection and also application of spatial and spectral information for hyperspectral image classification. So today, we are privileged to have with us the Honorable Vice Chancellor of our university, Professor Dr. Shoykot Moitro, who has been our mentor and is the inspiration behind hosting such events. So in today's webinar, we are also privileged to have with us Professor Raul Feitosa from Pontifical Catholic University, Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, who is an expert in the field of remote sensing and geospatial data analytics. We also welcome Mr. George Camoro, his PhD student, who will also share his research work with us. So at the very outset of this webinar, I would like to request our Honorable Vice Chancellor to kindly inaugurate the session.
Thank you, Dr. Somdatta Chakraborty. So it's a nice experience to have eminent personalities like Professor Raul Feitosa, and I can see that a young face, Mr. George Samaro, they joined today's webinars. So it will be the right blend of wisdom and seeing these subjects from young mindset. So it will be a great experience, I believe, to all our panelists. And this particular area, geoinformatics, though I do not belong to this subject, but I understand the importance of these subjects, particularly ever increasing demand of these subjects in industrial sectors, being and making it more viable for choosing as a profession. So those engineers and researchers, they can have a bright career in these subjects if they have a proper understanding of it. This is number one. And number two is there will be different exquisite and novel applications in the field of research also. for these areas. So for industrial sector, for research sector, these subjects is going to have immense potential in near future. And we are fortunate, particularly for this COVID-19 brought us this opportunity of bringing eminent faculties and personalities and doyens and experts like Professor Raul, and then we had with us in the previous session Professor Antonio Plaza, Professor Sucharita Gopal, and then from China, Professor Zhong Li, and there Mr. George. So these personalities at a normal situation would not have been possible for us to arrange these types of seminar in a physical format, and it is possible now because of this embracing of this digital technology, digital platform, and we should take this opportunity to the best possible extent to the benefit of these opportunities. And I believe that there will be a large number of questions, and definitely all will not be may not be addressed today with a limited time period, but there will be an option of posting this question and discussion forum that may be addressed later. But what I urge to all these participants here, particularly young students and researchers, try to take it as a very this important subject of the future for developing your career, your research passion, and all these things. So with this, I again, from the core of my heart, I would like to congratulate Dr. Somdata Chakraborty for organizing this webinar within a short period of time, inviting the stalwart speakers from different parts of the world. And my sincerest thanks to Professor Raul and Mr. George for responding to our call, for giving their consent for deliberation at today's webinar. And my well best wishes to all the panelists for a very fruitful and effective takeaway knowledge from this webinar. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir, for your inspiring words. Now, to begin with the session, I think before we begin, I would like to give a very brief introduction of Professor Feitosa, after which we can start the deliberation. Professor Feitosa studied electronics engineering in the Aeronautics Institute of Technology, San Jose, Brazil, where he graduated in 1979. Subsequently, he joined Rodia, a company of the French group, as a development engineer. In 1983, he obtained the Master in Engineering degree, also from the same institution. In 1985, he started his PhD studies at Friedrich Alexander University, Germany, where he obtained in 1988 the doctorate degree in computer science. Since then, he is with the Pontifical Catholic University of Rio de Janeiro, and since 1994, where he is a professor. In 2003, he created and coordinated, since then, the Computer Vision Lab of the Department of Electrical Engineering at the university, with a group of about 12 researchers, most of them through grants from Brazil Science Organization and from the industry. His professional interests comprise digital image analysis with emphasis on remote sensing. He has acted as an associate editor of Brazilian Journal of Cartography and guest editor in IEEE Journal of Selected Topics and in Applied Earth, IEEE Geoscience and Remote Sensing Letters, ISPRS Journal of Photogrammetry and Remote Sensing. He is a member of IEEE Geoscience and Remote Sensing Society and Brazilian Society of Cartography, Geodesy, Photogrammetry and Remote Sensing. Professor Feitosa is a co-founder and was, until 2017, the president of the Brazilian chapter of IEEE GRSS. Since July 2016, he is the vice president of the Technical Commission of ISPRS. He published more than 200 articles in highly ranked journals and conference proceedings, and has been involved in the organization of many scientific proceedings in the field of remote sensing and image analysis. Professor Feitosa maintains an intensive interaction with universities and research institutions inside and outside Brazil. He has coordinated numerous cooperation projects involving European universities and companies with support of various international funding agencies. So now I request Professor Feitosa to please begin his deliberation.
Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for the kind introduction, especially for the invitation. It's an honor for me and a pleasure to participate in this webinar. I want to share my screen with you. Please give me a feedback if it's working. Do you see my screen right now?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, fine. So, just a moment. Yeah, okay. So this is the title of my talk today, Fully Convolutional Recurrent Networks for Crop Mapping from Multitemporal SAR Images. So I'm going to present some fundamentals underlying this research. And in the end of my talk, I will present some results of what we have been doing in the last year. And in particular, I will present some results of the research of Mr. Jorge Chamorro, who is also attending this meeting. Well, the results I'm going to show you is part of his research exactly on the topic of this talk. So in the end of my speech, if you have some questions regarding details of the implementation, how it was implemented, and so on, I think Jorge Chamorro will be able to clarify all those issues. So this is the structure of my talk. First, motivation, objectives, and then I will start talking about some fundamentals. And then I will go into the research itself, the fully convolutional recurrent neural networks. I will present some results of our experimental analysis, and I will end with some concluding remarks. So let's start with the motivation. Oh, let me see if everything is working here. Should. Oh, yeah. So, you know, so the world population is growing since ever. We have here on the right side of the screen a plot that shows how the world population is evolving in the last 70 years. So in consequence of this growth, it's very important that there is some technical problem here. Okay. There is a need of policies to ensure food supply with minimal environmental impact. This is an important issue for the world, and in particular from my country, because agriculture is one of the most important economic activity in my country. So most of our export comes from the agriculture in Brazil. And in this scenario, crop monitoring is essential to develop commercial plans, regulate internal stocks, and for management decisions. And well, there is a let me see here. Oh, okay. And remote sensing plays an important role in this scenario because it provides a cost-effective tool for monitoring crops. We have nowadays many free data, especially from the Copernicus program, the Sentinel-1 satellite. So we have also the Landsat images that we can obtain for free. And those images cover virtually the entire world. And at a high spatial resolution and a high also temporal resolution. We have 10 meters spatial resolution in the Sentinel series. And we have a revisit time of about 6 days, 5-6 days. And we have the most important source of remote sensing data are the optical images, which is very nice. It has the advantage that it's easy to interpret. Still in the world, much of the interpretation of remote sensing images is done by human interpreters. And optical images are easy to interpret because we are used to this kind of information. In our eyes work in a similar way. This is the kind of information that we interpret during in our day life. But the optical remote sensing image has some disadvantages. It depends on solar light, as you see here, and clouds prevent the acquisition. In our Amazon rainforest, for instance, we have clouds most of the year. Only 1-2 months in the year we have cloud-free images. People in the Amazon forest used to say that they have only 2 seasons in the year. In one season, it rains every day. In the second season, it rains all day long. This is a bit exaggerated, but it reflects more or less how things are in Amazon. An alternative to optical images are the SAR, synthetic aperture radar. It has advantages in comparison to the optical image because it's almost not affected by atmospheric conditions, clouds and weather, and it can work independent on the solar light. The disadvantage of SAR data is that they are not so easy to interpret. You have here on the upper right corner an example of data captured from SAR sensors. It's not so easy to tell what is in this image. And besides, this SAR data is affected by a kind of noise, so-called speckle noise, that is also much more difficult to handle than the Gaussian noise that we are used to when we work with optical images. So crop recognition in some assigns crop type to parcels in agricultural areas. And this task is particularly challenging in tropical regions due to the favorable climate and local practices. So the farmers in Brazil, for instance, in my country, they have much more flexibility to plan the use of their land as the farmers in temperate regions, where the climate conditions are not so favorable. So in consequence, the crops have a dynamics which is much more complex in between the tropics. And on the other hand, most of the works published so far on this theme refer to temperate regions where they have a single crop per year. This is the rule in their case, because they have the winter and they have snow, and only in the summertime they can, well, have crops. So in countries like Brazil, in other tropical countries, we can have up to three crops per year. And when a new crop cycle begins, depend on the particular crop type, and depending on can be the problem of crop monitoring in temperate regions consists of finding the crop in that season. So we have a series of data that covers, well, the agricultural in the end having so set, as we see here, exemplified in these pictures. So in this scenario, the objective of the research that I'm going to present you in few minutes is to propose and evaluate fully convolutional recurrent networks for a per date crop mapping or recognition, if you prefer, from multi-temporal SAR images on tropical regions. As I mentioned before, this has been the research topic of Mr. Jorge Chamorro, who is helping me here today in this talk. Specifically, in the results that I'm going to show you, we tested 3 different architectures. We have here the names: unidirectional ConvLSTM, bidirectional ConvLSTM, and bidirectional dense ConvLSTM. I will come into details in a minute. So before we start talking about the research itself, I just want to respond this question that might not be obvious for some of you. Why do we need multi-temporal data? This picture you are seeing on the screen, I made it in February. I made it myself. This is a picture of soybean field, you know. In the same day, within 30 minutes, I took pictures from different spots. I was traveling with my car, and these are some other examples of soybeans fields. You see that in this picture, the crop is in a completely different, we call it phenological stage. So the appearance of such a crop in this stage is obviously different from what we got from this stage here. And there are here some other pictures. You see here, it's closer to the harvest time in this picture, and even closer here. And in this case, this is the post-harvest well, stage, if you wish. And I have here some pictures I made. I just picked some of the soybeans from the soil. So you see, you can have different crops in different stages. So different crop types in different stages may look similar, although they are different crop types. Depending on the phenological stage they are at the acquisition time. Okay, and that's why we have to take pictures for along many dates, so that we can capture how these crops evolve in the season. In each crop has a particular evolution, and from that evolution is possible to identify more accurately the crop we have in each field. So now, before I start showing you some recent results, I will go into some fundamentals. I was exchanging some emails with Mrs. Sondata in order to understand well, the profile of the audience and your background. I am not so sure how much you know, how well acquainted you are with some of those concepts this research is based on. So I decided to go into some fundamentals. I will use some minutes here in my talk to explain such fundamentals. It may be kind of boring for some of you if you are also familiar with those concepts, but I still hope that it will be useful for at least some of you. So let's start talking about convolutional networks. So I know we are in the middle of a wave, the so-called deep learning wave, which started in 2012. And the so-called convolutional networks play a central role in this wave. So how does it work? Let me tell you, yes. So a typical convolutional neural network, in this case for image classification, can be seen very coarsely as a sequence of three things, not only three things, but primarily three things, the so-called convolutional layers, interspersed with activation functions and pooling operations. This is oversimplified, but I think it's enough for our purposes here. So we have here, represented in this picture, a convolution here, an activation function that I will explain right now. And this step here corresponds to a pooling operation. And then we have again the same sequence of these operations, convolution, activation, and pooling. And we have here the same set of operations. It's being done a number of times till we come up with a result in the end, which may be, for instance, an image classification. I mean, in this image classification refers to the task that consists in assigning a single label, single class label to the whole scene, to the whole image. And you see here in the picture that in each step, not necessarily, but frequently, the spatial resolution of the data is reduced as we move across these so-called layers. So what is the convolutional layer, which is well, this is the first step. So let's suppose that you have here on the left side the input image, okay? This is, well, the spatial dimension is H and W, and you have a depth represented by this letter D here. And what we have here is what we call filter. Well, it is a 3 by 3 by D. This is a filter. Each of these box here has a weight associated to it that defines the filter. And the convolutional layer does more or less what is represented here in this animation. So we immerse the filters, so to say, in the data, and we multiply the weights by the corresponding data, and we add up all those products and produce a single result. And then we slide this filter over the input data, and you get the second result. And we keep on sliding it, and we obtain other results. And we keep on doing that, and then we move to the next row, and you keep on doing that. In the end of this process, it may take longer in this animation, so let me accelerate it a bit. So you get a result that looks like this, for instance. So we have here what we call the activation map, okay? But we can do it again using a second filter. It's exactly the same procedure. And then we obtain in the end another activation map. And we can do it a third time, and you keep on doing that as many times as you wish, as would be convenient depending on our application. And you have here, in this way, a number of activation maps, okay? So you can do it up to any different filters. The weights of these filters is something that we have to learn using some supervised annotated data on label data, okay? But this is another thing that I do not want to tackle in depth in this talk. This is something it's important to know that we have to learn those ways. Okay, so, and then after we produce those activation maps, each one of those values are applied to an activation function. The operation in the convolution is, the operations are linear. It's just linear operations. And now we introduce in this activation function a nonlinearity in the model that we are trying to build using these convolutional neural networks. So you see here a number of activation functions. They are highly nonlinear, as you can see. So that with the help of those activation functions, we introduce nonlinearity in our model, which increases considerably the capacity of our models. Thanks to these procedures, since we do it a number of times in sequence, convolutional neural networks are able to approximate arbitrarily complex functions. And we also have the third aspect that I mentioned before, the so-called pooling operations. These pooling operations replaces the output of a net at a certain location with a summary statistic of nearby outputs. This is a kind of downsampling, okay? Well, the most common max pooling operation in convolutional neural networks, this is not the only way to do that, but it's quite common. So we replace the values of neighboring pixels arranged in a 2x2 arrays, as you see here. So you select for each of those groups the maximum value, as you see here, okay? And in this case, this is a so-called max pooling with 2x2 stride. So the result we get is has a lower resolution at all, but these operations are quite common. So, and now let me tell something about the so-called fully convolutional neural network. This is not the convolutional neural network, this is the fully convolutional neural network. Before I do that, I want to introduce, or I want to mention the three most important tasks in computer vision. Again, this picture is not exhaustive. There are some other important applications, but these are probably the most important ones. So we have here on the left side the problem of image classification, which, as I mentioned before, consists of assigning a single label to a wall image or to a scene. In this case here is clearly a urban area, okay? Another important application is what we call detection or localization. In this kind of task, it is about locating instances of some given object class and to enclose those instances by a so-called bounding box, as you see here. Now, let's suppose that we are interested in locating cars in this image, okay? So these yellow boxes here would be, well, the ideal result in this example. And the third main application in computer vision is what we call semantic segmentation. And this is, well, the application that our research that I'm going to present refers to. Semantic segmentation consists of assigning a label to each individual pixel in the image. So you see here different colors. Each color represents a class label. So we have here, I don't know, this red may be a swimming pool, the white may represent roads, yellow here represents cars, and so on. This is exactly what we want to do. This is what our research is all about. We intend to identify in each pixel in the image what is the crop type that we have in that point in the soil. Yeah. So the problem that we addressed at the beginning of my talk was image classification, a single label for the whole image. And this was the structure that I present to you. So we have a sequence, typically a sequence of convolution, activation, and pooling. Well, the resolution decreases. And here in the end, typically, we do a kind of flattening operation. So we take this tensor here that we get in the end of this chain, and we stretch this tensor, and we get a vector, okay? And we have here in the end another vector that should contain the probability that this image belongs to the different classes. So if you have 10,000 different classes, this would be a vector of 1,000 dimension equal to 1,000, and each element corresponds to the posterior probability that this image belongs to well, the corresponding class. So in this stage here, we have no convolution. We have what we call a fully connected layer. So each probability here is determined by all the elements of this stretched vector that we have here. So, but in the problem of semantic segmentation, for semantic segmentation, we have a problem here. So the usual architecture of convolution network looks like that. So the spatial resolution decreases as we move forward in the network. But what we want actually is to assign a label to each individual pixel of the input image. And at this point, we have a much lower resolution. So what we do in order to recover the original resolution, we start doing, in a way, the opposite operation. So we still have a number of convolutions and a number of activation functions, but we also have upsampling operations that are commonly called transpose convolution, so that we recover the original spatial resolution here. And then based on that, we obtain the label image containing the labels of the image for each pixel. So you can tell that this kind of architecture consists of two phases. This compressing phase, which we call encoder, and well, the name is important because what we have here at this point at the end of the encoder is a compact representation of the input image, which we hope that still preserve all the necessary information to assign later on the class labels. And we have then the decoder stage that takes the code which is produced by the encoder and recovers the original architecture. This is the expanding stage, right? What is very important to underline here is that all those operations are convolutions. We have no fully connected layer. That's why it is called fully convolutional, because in this kind of application, we have no connected layer. So this is in sum the idea behind most of the networks that have been used for fully convolutional for semantic segmentation. I want to give you one specific example that was introduced in 2015. Actually, it was originally used for the analysis of medical images, but it has been used also for many other applications, including remote sensing, even today, which is the so-called UNet. So you see here the picture. I took it from the paper where it was proposed. You see clearly in a different way this structure of an encoder here, this first part, and a decoder here in the second part, where in the contractive stage now we reduce the resolution, and the next stage we expand resolution towards the original spatial resolution, okay? One interesting characteristic of this UNet is that we have this kind of connections that we see here. Well, this is so-called skip connections. So as you see, the result we obtained here in the encoder, at this point, this result is appended to the results that we obtained from the convolutions at this point. In this way, so this result were calculated in this phase, but in this way, so as we aggregate the information from corresponding layers of the encoder, we hope to recover part of the spatial details that got lost due to the reduction of the resolution through the layers of the encoder. So we do it here, and we do it here again, and here at the end, and we expect that here at the outcome we can recover most of the fine details, so that the borders of objects of different classes in the results are better or more accurately defined. Now, I want to tell something about recurrent neural networks. Recurrent neural networks, it's a depth modeling sequence of data. There are many applications. For instance, speech recognition, language translation. This is not something that we work on. This is more the natural language processing. This is not our field. Image captioning, which consists of producing a textual description of an image content. And this is exactly our case. This is the multi-temporal image analysis. So this is exactly our problem. So we are going to use a recurrent network in this research. We use it. In another application is video analysis. It's also a typical example of sequential data. And there are many other applications here. So what is the idea of recurrent neural network? You have here a very simple pictorial representation of recurrent neural network cell. So the most important part is this square here, this f of theta. It represents the RNN cell. It's a function that contains a number of parameters, which are here represented by the symbol theta. So this box here produces a result. It gets first an input that I will call external input, and produces a result, which is the so-called internal state. Okay, it produces a result, internal state. This black box here represents a delay. So that means what we have here after this delay is the internal result produced by this cell in the preceding time step. Okay, so this prior internal state, along with the external input, is the actual input to the RNN cell. And we have also here the output, which is computed somehow from the internal state. So this is recurrent exactly because this cycle that you see here in this diagram. But recurrent neural network can be also represented in unrolled variant. This looks like this. So if you take this basic network here and we unroll it, so you will replicate this cell as many times as the number of elements of our sequence, as you see here. So you have here the external inputs, x1 up to xt, and you see here the internal state is age being passed to the next iteration, so that this configuration here is in many cases easier to deal with, or easier to interpret. What is important here is that in all cases, in all those instances, these parameters theta that have to be learned by training are the same. In other words, you can envisage this scheme here represented in the picture as a sequence of layers of a convolutional neural network. So try to imagine that this operation here, embedded in these boxes, involves convolutions, involves pooling, involves activation functions, so that each of these instances can be seen as a layer of a convolutional neural network. And this convolutional network would have as many layers as the number of inputs in the sequence. Okay, so we can use a number of most techniques that we use for convolutional neural networks, especially for training, also for recurrent neural network. The only difference is that the parameters in each of those layers are exactly the same in this case, whereas in the convolutional neural networks, the parameters are different in each layer. Okay. Okay. So let's move on. Convolutional neural networks can be used to produce multiple results. This is the so-called many-to-many configuration. So as you see here, we have here the external inputs for each time step, and in each time step we produce here a different output. This is exactly what we want in our research. We want to have an output for each image in the sequence. For each date represented in our sequence, you want to have, well, the classification result. Another variant is the so-called many-to-one. So we have here the inputs here, x1 up to xt, but we are interested in just one output that should refer to the entire sequence, right? This is one example of it. Is exactly the crop recognition methods that have been applied in temperate regions, not in all cases, but frequently. So since they have a single crop per year for the whole sequence, they just produce one result per sequence, of course, but one result for each pixel position. In our case, we need for each pixel position a class label in each time step. So our problem in tropical regions is typically a many-to-many application of recurrent neural network. So there are some extensions of these RNNs. Usually, these inputs and outputs in the, well, let's say vanilla RNNs are vectors here. The input, well, the internal states and also the output, okay? But it involves essentially matrix multiplication essentially. But there is a variant called convolutional RNNs, where the matrix multiplications are replaced by convolutions, the operation that I introduced a few minutes ago. So instead of vectors, what we have here are matrices or tensors. Well, and since the beginning, so the input is a tensor, the output is a tensor or a matrix, and all the intermediate results computed inside the RNN still are also tensors. And this is exactly our case. So we are going to use, since we are interested in spatial results, we are going to use this convolutional RNNs, and this variant is what we are interested in. So, so the data flows through these many instances of the RNN, keeping the input dimension, typically 3D instead of just 1D, as we have here in the so-called vanilla RNNs. And we can also use another variant called bidirectional. So standard RNNs take only the past into account, as you see here. So at this point in time, for instance, we have only the information of time step 1. At this point here, we can only have information coming from the preceding time steps. But in some applications, we have the full sequence available. So, for instance, if you have this problem in non-real-time language translation, we can have the full sentences and we have some time to translate these sentences. We can also have access to the full sequence in offline video analysis and so on. So this is also our case. So we have the full, in some application, we have the full sequence. So why not take advantage of later steps to infer what happens in the early ones? This is the question here. Actually, there is no good reason for a good response for that question. So what we do in order to take advantage of the future yeah? Codes. It's very simple. So you have here RNN in the unrolled version. Here we have the inputs and here the outputs. What we do, RNN that works in the opposite position. This RNN that goes backward gets the same inputs and produces also an outcome for each point in time, as you see here. And these two versions, the forward and the backward RNNs, share the same parameters, the parameters that have to be learned. The outcome at each time step here, 101 up to OT, in the many-to-many configuration, will be a kind of combination of or concatenation of the results produced by the forward and backward passes. Okay, so in this case, we expect that we are going to have well better results than it would be possible with simple unidirectional. Please, could you give me some feedback? I think my connection.
Now we're hearing you.
Are you hearing me?
Yes.
How long was I disconnected?
For 2 minutes, 2 to 3 minutes.
2-3 minutes, yes.
2-3 minutes. Oh, did you see? Did you see this slide here or not?
Can you please share once again? The slide
sure.
sharing is not on.
Sorry. Just a moment. Do you see me here? The slide?
Yes, it's visible now.
Yeah. Did you see this slide or not?
Yes, you were explaining this one only.
Yeah. Okay. Then, well, what I want to say is that in this, just a moment. Well, and also this slide, you saw the slide, right? Yes?
You were explaining this.
Yes.
I was gradient problems. Actually, this phenomenon, the vanishing of gradients, make it difficult to for the RNNs to learn their parameters, because it's based on a gradient descent. The training procedure is based on gradient descent, and the longer the sequence, the smaller gets the gradient as it propagates through the network. And to fix this problem, a guy called Sepp Hochreiter introduced 23 years ago the so-called long short-term memory, the LSTM recurrent cell. And this is the guy. This guy was definitely ahead of his time, because it was much before the deep learning boom. Essentially, he proposed a new architecture for this cell, yeah, which looks like this. So I don't have time to go into the details how it works. All I want to tell is that the research we did, and I'm going to present the results right now, is based on these type of cells for the RNN, the LSTM. Still today, it is, I would say, the preferred recurrent cell architecture for recurrent neural networks, even today. So that's why I mentioned that this guy did actually a fantastic job. It was during his PhD time. And then now I will move to the research itself. I will go faster, I guess. We consider it in our research. So our problem, I guess it's clear. So we have a number of sequence of data. In our case, are SAR data, Sentinel-1 data. And you want to use a convolutional recurrent network, in particular a convolutional LSTM, to produce label image that will tell me the different crop types we have over those images at each point in time. Okay, so this is the first architecture. I call it unidirectional conv LSTM because the cell is a convolutional LSTM, and all the rest is exactly as I described it before, with one exception. Here in the end, we have a few operations. Please don't get disturbed for that. But for completeness, I just described what we do here. It's a convolution. There are here two operations. This is the batch normalization that I did not mention before. This ReLU is an activation function, and you have a softmax is another function that delivers posterior probability for each class, and also for each pixel in the image. Tested in our published by Suvam. This is the first architecture, unidirectional using convolutional LSTM. This is the recurrent cell. We have here the input, the convolutional LSTM, and also the convolution and this operation presentation of the same architecture. But I just showed the cell here. We have here the input, this sequence, and I have here the sequence of results. Okay. Second architecture that we tested is very similar to the previous one, but it's bidirectional. So you see this figure is very similar to what we just showed you, but we want to use a bidirectional version. So we have exactly the same structure, but processing the data backwards here. And the results of the forward and backward passes are combined somehow here in the output. And again, we have the same kind of processing steps in the end. So very simple, right? Very similar to the previous one. The main difference is that we use a bidirectional architecture of the recurrent neural network. And the third, and once again, these so this pair of cells that refer to the same point in time can be combined pictorially, just to simplify the pictorial representation into a single cell, and it looks like this, okay? This would be the second alternative that you are investigating. And the third alternative, which was proposed by George, who is watching this talk right now, and this is, well, this is, again, the description of the cell. In this case, the only difference is in relation to the previous architecture is that we have here a bidirectional variant of the convolutional LSTM instead of a unidirectional. And our proposal, which is the George proposals, was we have also a bidirectional LSTM, but the input data is the result produced by an encoder. Do you remember this fully convolutional architecture that consists of an encoder and decoder structure? So in this proposal, we get an encoder here, we use an encoder to produce a more compact representation of the input data. And this, the outcome of the encoder, will be the actual inputs to the recurrent cells, as you see here. And this is done, the same encoder now is applied for all time steps. But that's not all. In the output, of course, now we have here with the encoder reduced the spatial resolution. And we want to have the results at this original spatial resolution. So we have here in the output a decoder that recovers the original spatial resolution. Once again, I can represent this architecture in a simplified way where the cell consists of bidirectional convolutional LSTM. Yeah. So this is our proposal. This is how it looks like. We have here the bidirectional convolutional LSTM, and you have here some more details of the encoder and of the decoder. Unfortunately, I don't have much time to go into details of the elements of the decoder and the encoder architecture here, but the main idea that I want to transmit right now is using the encoder to produce an the input for the RNN and a decoder at the output to restore the original spatial resolution. So in this way, the convolutional cell we work with a more compact representation of the data, and we expect that we are going to have better results. Of course, as you see here, this dashed lines here correspond exactly to the skip connections that I mentioned when I presented the UNet. You remember that? This is a trick, so to say, to recover the spatial details that we might have lost along the encoder stage. Okay, so this is essentially our architecture. So, and then well, there are some other details about one of the blocks that are parts of the encoder and decoder stage. I cannot go into details here. If you are interested, we can happily, gladly provide some more information. And we made some experimental analysis. This was George's work. We used two publicly available data sets from Brazil, therefore from a tropical region, tropical regions. This is one of them. This is Brazil and the Midwest of Brazil. This is a city here. This picture shows the distribution of different crops along the year. You see that's quite non-uniform. No? And this is the second data set. It's called Luiz Eduardo Magalhães. This is the crop distribution in this data set. All of them are available, as I said. If you wish, we can provide this data set for you. And these are the results. So this is the results we got for Campo Verde. And each group bar represents these three architectures that we investigated. The first two architectures we used as a baseline, and the third one as our proposal. And in this case here, we have the average F1 score. And you see that in most cases, one step after the other. So the first conclusion that you see is that the unidirectional variant delivered the poorest results. But these results get better as we move ahead in the sequence. And the reason is very simple, because we are using more information now. So the past information, we have more past information as we move on in the sequence. So that's why we observed here an increase in the performance of the unidirectional convalescent. And we are highlighting here in this figure the gain that we obtained with our proposal in relation to the second best performing variant. So it is in terms of F1 score is well significant. These are the same results expressed in terms of overall accuracy. We see that the proposed variant here, the bidirectional variant with encoder-decoder, delivered the best results consistently in all dates. The results, here we have some specialized results. As example here, some months, October, December, and May. We have here in this column the ground truth, and in these columns we have the results produced by each of these variants. So you can see clearly here, for instance, in this case here, this partial here refers to one class, which is yellow. The first two baselines, well, were not able to recognize the true class. In our variant was not perfect, but was better. And you see here in other mounts that our results tends to be less affected by this salt and pepper effect, as you see here. Huh? We have here smoother results. Huh? Well, for the second data set, we obtain similar results. In this case, our method was also, in terms of F1 score, consistently better than the second best performing counterpart, as you see here. Again, well, the unidirectional variant performs better as we move ahead in the sequence. And this is the gain we obtain with our methods. Right? And this is the same results expressed in terms of overall accuracy. You see exactly the same behavior. So the best performance produced by our approach. This is a picture for Luiz Eduardo Magalhães, the second data set. And we can observe the same phenomenon I just showed you for the first data set. Well, some concluding remarks. In this research, we extend the convolutional LSTM to classify crops at each date in the sequence. It's a many-to-many configuration. And we propose a novel hybrid approach that combines the multi-scale spatial feature extraction capabilities of FCN. So we took the encoder and decoder concepts of directional variants, outperformed the unidirectional variants, and our hybrid approach consistently outperformed the baselines. Assuring directions, we intend to explore multimodal data, not only SAR, but use also optical data or some other meteorological data, for instance, when the data is available. And finally, a very important question refers to the generalization question. Can we use the network that was trained for one area, for one geographical area, in another geographical area where the same crop types are supposed to come about? These are questions that Jorge is currently investigating right now. So if you want to have some more details about that, this research was published here last year in a conference in Munich. And about 1 month ago, Jorge submitted an extension of his research to a journal. We still have no reply from the reviewers, but we hope that we are going to get successful. In this other paper, George, we investigate other encoder decoder architectures or recurrent architectures for the same target application. So that's all. Thank you very much. I apologize for the long talk, and if you have some question, I will try to respond.
Thank you very much, sir. Would Mr. George, like to add anything to the presentation? Like, will he separately present anything, or?
No, I think it was complete, the explanation, and I have been answering some questions.
Yes, yes.
So yes, I think it's...
So thank you so much, sir, for this very informative lecture. You have very nicely explained the fundamentals of convolutional neural network, fully convolutional neural network, recurrent network, and you have introduced the hybrid network architecture and how to combine it by applying this combined architecture for crop recognition from multi-temporal sequences of SAR images. You have also touched upon LSTM, long short-term memory, recurrent cell, and how you have used this for your research. Thank you very much, sir. Now there are a number of questions that has been answered by Mr. George. Some very interesting questions like why convolutional neural networks? Why should we use convolutional neural networks over feed-forward neural networks? And what are encoders and decoders in fully convolutional neural network? Is there any specific name for the bunch of each convolutional layer? So there are several questions which are there in the question and answer box, and that has been answered by Mr. George. Would you like to add anything to it, sir? Like, one question is, why is it called bidirectional? It is the kind of feedback, it should be called as closed loop instead of bidirectional. This is one question.
So, well, let's take one question at a time. would you pick one of them, of these questions?
One is, the first one is why convolutional networks should be considered over feed-forward neural networks.
Why it should be considered feed-forward network?
Why should we consider convolutional neural networks over feed-forward neural networks?
Why a convolutional network should be considered feed-forward neural networks, right?
Yes.
No, why to use, instead of feed-forward networks, why to use a convolutional network?
So as a matter of fact, convolutional neural networks is a feed-forward neural network. Because what is a feed-forward network? Is a network that, so you put the data, the input data at the input, and this data is being processed one layer after the other, right? So the data does not, there is no feedback. The recurrent network is not a feed-forward neural network because there is constantly a feedback. So actually, convolutional neural network is a feed-forward network. Do you want to say something, George?
Yes, I think maybe the question could have been about the fully connected networks compared to the convolutional networks. So I think I wrote an answer about this, and I said that convolutional networks allow to automatically detect features from spatial data by training the convolutional filters, which extract relevant information.
May I ask you, George, to turn on your camera?
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
I hope we have answered the question. I'm not sure.
Yes.
If not, please tell us.
There are some more questions. How to make labeling of the data for higher accuracy rate? This is not a complete question.
How?
This question is not complete. I will take another question. What is the internal state function in case of recurrent neural networks?
What's the internal?
What is the internal state function in case of?
Okay. Well, so indeed, I did not explain this internal function. In fact, if we are talking about the LSTM, this is quite complicated. This is not something that I can explain in few words. It's not extremely complicated, but it would require some minutes. All I can tell is that, well, in short, that we have some the so-called gates inside the LSTM cell that selects. So the gates select what from the past will be preserved, what from the results produced up to that point will be preserved, and what that has been computed at that point in time will be added to what comes from the past. Now, this selection is done by means of kind of switches. Actually not switch in the strict sense, but using some sigmoid functions. But I understand that this explanation is very incomplete, and that's because it's not so simple. So if you want to have some more information, you can contact me, or you can, with more time, I can explain that.
Another question. Is there any possibility of one-to-many recurrent neural networks?
One-to-many?
One-to-many?
Yes, there are one-to-many. For instance, one example is image captioning. For instance, the input is one image, and the output is a textual description that consists of many words. So each word of the description is one output. This would be a typical one-to-many configuration.
Another question is, what does multimodal data mean? What does multimodal data mean?
Okay, I'm sorry for that. Multimodal, for instance, in our case, we have SAR data and optical data. Optical data are not available all the time due to cloud covering, for instance. Multimodal approaches involve data of different sources. One example would be using optical and SAR data, and try to explore to exploit both of them. We could use in our application also meteorological data. In some case, we could have information about the height, digital terrain model or surface models. This would be another modal, so to say. Multimodal applications exploit data of different forms and coming from different sources.
Question: how are you labeling the data?
How?
How are you labeling the data? Mr. George has already answered. We use two public data sets. Yes, can you answer?
You mean how did we produce the data sets? That's the question.
Yes.
Yeah, you can answer this question, George, please.
Yes, we used two public data sets which were already labeled in previous works. And I left the name of these data sets in the answer. It's Campo Verde and Luis Eduardo Magallanes data sets. And labeling in these works was made using satellite images in combination with visits to the sites, to the fields, and interviews.
So in the paper I showed in the end, there are references to the papers where the work to produce those data sets are just.
Another very important question. In the study of spatial resolution of the Landsat data, how to overcome lower spectral resolution to get an improved result? When we study...
Well,
yes.
Yeah, please.
When we are studying about the spatial resolution of Landsat data, or when we are considering the spatial resolution of Landsat data, how do we overcome the lower spectral resolution to get an improved result?
Well, of course, we cannot create data that does not exist. A way to overcome this limitation is exactly using multimodal data. But if you have only Landsat data, it's very difficult to create data that is not inside, which is not present. There are some approaches using artificial intelligence, so-called super resolution. There is a student in our group who worked with super resolution using these deep neural networks in his master thesis. But so my perception, and this is my personal perception, what we are actually doing is to build data that is plausible. So in that particular research, it was more about spatial resolution, and the question refers to the spectral resolution, if I got it right. But essentially, the same idea could be applied in this case. But what we obtained through those super resolution methods is just plausible guesses. Yeah, it's not so, I would say, so accurate and so reliable in my personal point of view. So the way to get around this problem is to, well, obtain some more data.
Is there a possibility of using hyperspectral data with high spatial data?
So in this case, you would use some other data source. Yeah? Yes.
Answered most of the questions. In fact, all of the questions have been answered by Mr. George. He has taken great pains to answer all the questions that are there in the question answer. Thank you so much.
Yeah, very interesting questions.
Are you responding? Are you responding per chat, George?
Yes, I answered all answers by chat.
Oh, fantastic.
The question, what is the advantage of bidirectional RNN?
Can you respond, George?
Yes, well, the regular recurrent networks only take advantage of information from previous elements in the sequence of past information. So a bidirectional network allows to use both past and future information in the sequence to make a prediction. So this is the advantage. We can use both past and future information.
Thank you. So with this, I think we are over with the questions. Most of them, in fact, all of them has been answered. I would also like to ask the participants to wait for the quiz. After the session is over, we have an online test for them. There are some questions and they'll get about half an hour to answer the questions, after which they'll be getting the certificates. And we also have a discussion forum. The participants who were there in the previous sessions know about it. We have a discussion blog whose URL is makout.bloggeo.blogspot.com. I request the host to please display it in the chat box. So if you have any further questions, if the participants have any further questions, you can write in the discussion forum. And we have our experts answering the questions. So after the session is over or in future also, the community can communicate with one another, answering and discussing about the applications of AI in geospatial data. Not only related to the topic of the topics that have been discussed in the webinar, but other related topics as well. So we have this discussion forum which is going on, and I also request our experts to please respond to the queries of our participants. So, so we have, thank you very much, sir, Mr. George and Professor Fetosa for such an informative session. We still have our Honorable Vice Chancellor with us. He is traveling at the moment, we can see. So, sir, would you like to say anything about the session?
I think everything has been discussed. Professor Raul explained nicely, and George handled all these questions beautifully. So what more we could expect? So it was a wonderful session, and I would like to express my sincerest thanks to both Professor Raul and Mr. George, and wish that in near future also in our other programs you will come and share your knowledge and experiences with our participants. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure and an honor for me to participate in the webinar. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So as we conclude today's session, on behalf of the university, we would like to express our sincerest heartfelt gratitude to all the participants as well, whose active participation and support has made this endeavor a success. We would like to express our sincerest thanks to our Honorable Vice Chancellor, who has always mentored and tutored us. And we would like to express our gratitude to Professor Fetosa and Mr. George, who have really enlightened us with their expert views on today's topic. I would also especially like to thank the webinar committee. I acknowledge the special endeavor and untiring efforts of the webinar committee members who have rendered relentless service with their feedback and helped us to maintain the technical requirements of this online event. So with this, we conclude today's session, and thank all of you for being here with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 So for the participants, request all the participants not to leave. Please give the online test. The discussion